We didn't grow up knowing what executive function skills were. Life felt overwhelming. Managing time, staying organized, and feeling stuck made everything difficult. What we didn't realize was that we lacked the skills to plan, prioritize, and break goals into manageable steps. After years of trial and error, we've seen how powerful executive function skills can be. With expert interviews, real stories, and practical strategies, this podcast is the resource we wish we had. Whether you're a student, parent, or professional, we're here to help you unlock your potential. Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast. Today we're joined by Andrew Watson. Andrew is the founder of Translate the Brain and the author of Learning Begins, the Science of Working Memory and Attention for the Classroom Teacher. With over 35 years in education and a Master's of Education from Harvard's Mind-Brain Education program, Andrew has a gift for making cognitive science practical for teachers and parents. In this episode, we discuss working memory, what it is, why it matters, and how to have productive conversations with educators and parents in supporting it. Andrew is phenomenal, and I highly recommend this one. Let's begin. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here with you, Brandon.
Every time I've talked to you, I've come away amazed with just how good you are at challenging notions. And so I want to dive in a little deep on that. And I want to start by asking you just a really basic question that we haven't covered much on the show. And that is, what is working memory?
An important question to start with. Let me back up a step. Whenever we talk about memory, we typically think about long-term memory. So if I ask you what your birthday is, if I ask you to show me how to ride a bicycle, that kind of memory is a memory that you've got long-term over a long period of time. And you can probably tell me what your birthday is, and you can probably show me how to ride a bicycle. So that's what long-term memory is. And of course, researchers spend lots and lots of time researching and exploring and understanding different facets of long-term memory. We could do a whole episode about that as well. Working memory is a different beast. So let's say I ask you to do a mental task. I say, okay, Brendan, do me a favor. I would like you to think of the 5 work days of the week, and I would like you to put those 5 words into alphabetical order in your head. And at that moment, that's not a long-term memory task. You don't have that in your long-term memory the way you have your birthday in your long-term memory, for instance. You have to stop and think, and you have to go into long-term memory, and you have to pull up, well, what are the days of the week? And oh, by the way, what is the order of the alphabet? And oh, by the way, how do you spell all of those words? In English, that's always a complicated thing. And then based on the instructions that I gave you and all of that information in long-term memory, you have to reorganize it and put it into a new kind of structure. And that's what working memory does. Working memory takes different bits of information, sometimes from outside of your head, like the instructions that I gave you, and sometimes from inside your head, like what are the work days of the week, and combines them and reorganizes them and puts them into a new structure. So that's working memory.
Yeah. And why does that matter in school?
Why does working memory matter in school? All academic learning requires working memory. Let me say that again. All academic learning requires working memory. If our students have learned it, that means they used working memory to learn it. If I'm going to learn a new math procedure, I need to take new things that the teacher says and apply those to ideas that I have in my long-term memory and come up with a new system. If I'm going to understand a poem, if I'm going to learn a particular new dance, if I've joined the track team and I want to learn how to pole vault, it doesn't matter what I'm learning. If I'm learning, I'm using working memory all the time. So a school is essentially a shrine that we build in order to honor successful working memory function.
It seems like a lot of traditional education rewards processing speed and working memory. I know a lot of parents, when they get an eval done on their child and they see a lower score on working memory, they're heartbroken because it feels almost like an academic death sentence in some ways. What advice would you give to parents who receive that low score on working memory?
So certainly I understand that response. It's definitely a challenge that school rewards successful working memory function. So if I go into school starting with a relatively low working memory capacity, that just means school is going to be harder for me. And it doesn't just mean that. It means that. It really will be a challenge. I think part of the advice I would have would be this. Sometimes my job is to say hard truths. And here's a hard truth. As far as I know, we don't have any artificial way to increase working memory capacity. If my child is growing and isn't growing as fast, isn't getting tall as fast as the other children, there's no artificial way to make my child taller. My child is going to get taller at the speed my child is getting taller. There's no artificial way, as far as I know, to increase working memory capacity. And it's sad that that's true, but I believe that that's true. So my first piece of advice would be, although it's tempting to go in that direction, although it's tempting to go look for strategies to increase working memory capacity, most researchers will tell you we just can't do it. There are some who will offer strategies, but for the most part, I don't think the field has anything near a consensus that that's possible. My second piece of advice is there are all sorts of things that we can do to help manage working memory capacity. My typical focus is working with teachers on helping students with working memory, but certainly parents and individuals who are thinking about working memory can take this sort of strategy and use them to be aware of their own processing or their child's processing and use that information to help them in a school environment and to help them in life generally.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said, first of all, because there are a bunch of program systems that promise that they can improve working memory. I know it's debated in the field, but I've never seen any clear research that says we can actually improve it. So I wanted to take a step back and acknowledge that sometimes there's some false claims out there with working memory. Let's jump into teaching, because I have a feeling a lot of the strategies you have for educators will relate to parents as well. So if there is a student or a group of students struggling with working memory, what can educators do to support that?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back as well. Often when we talk about cognitive functions like working memory with schools, we tend to think of that as a conversation that we're having about a particular small group of students over there, that those are the students who struggle with working memory. And so when we think about those students, we should think about working memory. My argument is no, actually, working memory is quite small. So if you think of that example I gave you when I asked you to put 5 words in alphabetical order in your head, most people can do 5. But if I switch from 5 to 10, you won't be able to do it. It's incredibly rare to be able to do it. It's very hard to do because we just don't have very much working memory. So it's not a certain group of students over there who have problems with working memory in school. All of us have working memory problems in school all the time. So I don't think teachers should think about just this group of students. I think teachers should be thinking about all of our students because we're all struggling with working memory. By the way, teachers are also struggling with working memory. Teaching is a working memory intensive task. So with that said, the framework that I use to talk with teachers about working memory goes like this. Once I explain to teachers what working memory is, why it's important, the next question is, well, how do we think about it? How do we have conversations about it? It feels like an enormous subject. How do we keep track of all of the different strategies? And for me, I think it's helpful to boil all of that conversation down to 3 questions. And the 3 questions go like this. Can I anticipate working memory overload? Can I look at my lesson plan? Can I look at a test that I'm planning to give? Can I look at a project I've assigned? And I say, oh, now that I've thought about this from a working memory perspective, I bet this step 3 right here, that's where working memory is going to get overloaded. So that's question number 1. Can I anticipate working memory overload? The second question is, can I recognize working memory overload when it happens? If I've overloaded Brandon's working memory, you're very unlikely to tell me that. The student, in my experience as a classroom teacher, no student has ever raised her hand and said, Mr. Watson, you've overloaded my working memory. It just doesn't happen. So I need to be good at recognizing it, even though my students aren't using words to tell me that it's happening. So question number 1, can I predict when it will happen? Question number 2, can I recognize it when it does happen? And then question number 3, can I solve it? Once I've predicted when it will happen, what do I do? When I recognize it when it does happen, what do I do? So for me, the big picture framework is anticipate, identify, solve. And that structure holds together an enormous number of particular solutions, but it's helpful to have that framework in place to keep all of those details clear.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal framework. And it does relate one-to-one for parenting as well. Like I can think of myself as a parent where, I fall into this as well when we're moving fast and I'm like, get this, and this, and I can see the overwhelm. What signs do educators and parents typically see when someone's working memory is overwhelmed?
So many signs. I'll give a classroom example to start with. One category that I've learned to recognize only recently is if my students ask me the same question several times in a row, it's almost certainly a sign that the thing I said before that overloaded their working memory. So for instance, if I say, okay, everybody, here's the definition of a gerund, please write it down. And my student Lisa says, I'm sorry, Mr. Watson, I spaced out. Could you repeat that? So I repeat it. And another student, George, says, I'm sorry, did you say noun or adjective? And I said, no. And if I get multiple questions, which are covering basically the same thing, what that means is what I just did overloaded their working memory. A year ago, I would just get frustrated. I would think, why on earth are you asking me that? I just answered your question. I just answered your question. Well, the reason they're asking the question, that's on me. I overloaded their working memory. So I've learned multiple questions that are asking basically the same thing. That's a sign of working memory overload.
Yeah, that's good, because I can think of it as a teacher, I would get mad at the class, right? It's like, why is nobody listening here? And really, it's probably on me.
It's probably on me.
Yeah, it's probably on me. I get this question all the time, and I don't know if the research is out yet, but is there effect on screen use and working memory? I can just see the two with overload kind of being tied, but I don't know if there's research out yet on that.
Oh, so two different ways to ask that question, and there are probably a dozen. But one is, does screen use over time have a persistent effect on working memory, which is to see screen use harm working memory? The answer to that question is, I don't know. And there's so many other variables involved, it would be hard, I think, to tease that out. Screen use is such a hotbed question these days. Whenever anybody says there's a one-to-one correlation or causation, screen use does this, either good or bad, I myself want to hear a little bit more about the research before I buy into that claim. So persistent effects, I don't really know. Current effects, absolutely. So for instance, I don't know about your experience. If I go to a news website and try and read the news, there's so many pop-up ads, there's so many flashing things, there's so many videos playing in the corner. It's just too busy an environment. So I'm constantly interrupting what I'm doing to click to shut the ad. I need to negotiate that visual environment. I don't find it a helpful way to read news because it's so visually complex and busy. It's working memory overload for me. At the same time, I'm sure there are kinds of screen apps that aren't designed that way, that are designed to help focus, or that are designed to simplify, that are designed to keep the visual working memory environment relatively clean and uncomplicated. And in those cases, I think they can be quite helpful. So I'm never a person saying I forbid screens always, and I'm not a person who says I champion screens always. I'm going to look very specifically, does this particular use of this particular technology help do this particular thing? And if the answer is yes, we're in. And if no, then we're not. And in most cases, it's both yes and no. So then I need to negotiate, well, can I get the good stuff and reduce the bad stuff?
Yeah, no, this is what I admire about you, is you really, really dive in and don't take anything for granted. So I really admire that. And part of the reason I ask is because, as someone who spends a lot of time in high schools and on college campuses, you see kids scrolling on TikTok, and there's a lot of information coming in before they even step foot into the classroom. Just helping them with that understanding of potentially this could harm your working memory for this class. And there's a time and a place for that, just maybe not right before class.
So I said a minute ago, I'm not an all or nothing kind of guy. I do think for most students in most classes in most schools, cell phones during class is a very bad idea. I myself am a high school teacher. The adolescent need to connect socially with other adolescents is so strong and age appropriate. That's what they should be doing. That having right at hand an opportunity to connect in a functionally infinite number of ways with their peers, of course they're going to focus on that. Of course they're not going to focus on the gerund. I do think for most classes in most schools and most systems, not having cell phones in class is an excellent idea as an example of the way that technology can definitely be a harm.
Yeah. So we went into what are signs of working memory overload, things like getting repeated questions over and over, and almost, is there also like a blank look?
Oh, absolutely.
Moving too quickly. Are there any other signs that you see where, whether it's your child or your class, that they're just overwhelmed?
Sure. So I'll do a blended one for you, one that's both an anticipate and an identify. So as you can see right away, when we adults give children instructions, processing instructions is a working memory task because I have to remember what all of the instructions are while I do each one. So Under the anticipate category, if I look at my lesson plan and I think, oh, wait a minute, this is the point in the lesson plan when I'm planning to give them 6 instructions, that's not going to work. It's just not. I should give them 2 instructions and see how that goes and then give them the next 2. So that's a very easy place to anticipate working memory overload. And similarly, under identify, if as a parent I say to my child, go to your room, get your mittens, drop this in your sister's room and come back and take the thing out of the oven. If they can't do all of that, well, that's a sign that I overloaded their working memory, that 4 instructions was too many. Let's go to 3, let's go to 1. There are times when with students and children and adults, 1 instruction is the correct number of instructions. So give the instruction, see if they can do it, and then give the next one.
Yeah. Going back to your third question, you just started to answer that. The can I solve it phase. So it could be reducing the number of instructions. Is there anything else that we can do to help solve this?
Yeah, so the teacher perspective and the parent perspective on this will probably be quite different because the teacher is designing a classroom experience which is largely structured and largely, I was going to say largely under our control. I'm not sure that that's always true. In our heads, we like to think that it's largely under our control.
Absolutely, and it rarely is, but that's okay.
And that's not exactly how parenting works, but I'll give you an example in teaching world and then see how that plays over into parenting world. So one of the complex truths about working memory is it's more complicated, of course, than my quick description at the beginning of our conversation. And one of the complexities is we don't just have one part of the mind that does working memory. Part of the mind does visual working memory and part of the mind does verbal working memory. So those are 2 different things and they interact with each other, but those are in fact measurably distinct capacities. And the reason that's important is that most teaching is highly verbal. So if, as I'm teaching, what I'm doing is saying things to my students, that's letting them use their verbal working memory, and that's good. But their visual working memory is just hanging around doing nothing, sort of twiddling its thumbs and feeling bored. So I said quite some time ago, there's no way to artificially increase working memory capacity, but I could use all of it. That would be a way to increase working memory capacity. So if when I'm teaching, I both say what I want my students to know and I have a visual representation of what I want them to know, then they're using both their visual working memory and their verbal working memory. And functionally, I've increased working memory capacity and I've made it easier for them to learn and to process what it is I want them to learn and process. So if, as I was putting my lesson plan together, I realized this particular part of the unit is going to be a working memory lift, well, then I can be careful to use this 2-approach strategy. And for the parents who are interested, the name of this, it's called, quote unquote, dual coding, using both a visual code and a verbal code. So dual coding. Dual coding is a highly powerful, highly useful teaching strategy. In parent world, here's an example of that. If I say to my child, I need you to go clean your room, and then I come back 20 minutes later and the room isn't clean and we'll have a good fight about that. It's entirely possible that my child doesn't exactly know what a clean room means. Step number 1 is with my child, we make the bed together and I say, okay, this is what it means to have a made bed. And then we take a picture of the made bed. And then I say, okay, the next day, please go make your bed. And here's what made bed looks like. So now they have both the words saying what the task is and a visual representation of what a completed version of the task is. And that way, because they've got both the visual and the verbal, it's likelier that they'll succeed at the task because they at least know what the goal is. So that would be a parenting example of a teaching strategy like, say, dual coding.
I love that example because it means something different to everybody, right? So having a picture of that is so, I think, just comforting for a student. Me having ADHD, it's just so comforting to know exactly what that expectation is. Doesn't mean I want to do it, but I at least know what I'm shooting for, right? That's fascinating. I've never thought about working memory in the sense of visual and verbal. Are there any other types of working memory?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is there will be people who want to sneak in a kind of physical working memory. And I shouldn't have put it like that. Sneak in sounds underhanded. There are people who are making arguments about that kind of capacity. I myself am not fully persuaded by that approach yet, so I don't talk about it much. And you were very polite about this, Brandon, when you said that I dig deep. That's a very nice way to say it. Another way to say it is I'm a little bit of a skeptical crank. It does take a lot to persuade me. So perhaps it's not surprising that that team of people hasn't yet persuaded me to think about a physical kind of working memory. But there are folks who will think that way.
Got it. And they're referring to something like learning a dance routine or something like that, it sounds like.
Yeah, the broader name for this field, the idea is that thinking happens in your body. So the name for that field is quote unquote embodied cognition. If there are listeners who are interested in that way of thinking about teaching and learning, the phrase to search under would be embodied learning. Embodied cognition. I myself find the field very broad and very hard to define in ways that make me nervous. And one of the reasons for that, as you know, Brandon, what I do for a living is I go to schools and I talk with teachers about cognitive capacities like working memory and long-term memory and attention and motivation. And then I give them suggestions about what to do with that information. And I don't feel comfortable giving people suggestions unless I'm really, really, really sure. It seems rude of me to tell you what to do without a good research basis. So for instance, you host a podcast. I don't host a podcast. I'm not going to give you podcasting advice because I don't know much about podcasting. I would need to see a lot of research about podcasting before I started giving you advice about it. So the same holds true for me and teaching. I'm not going to give teachers advice about this field of embodied cognition until I see a great deal of persuasive research. And I just haven't seen enough yet for me to feel comfortable telling teachers to do things differently based on that research.
Yeah, and I think that's very admirable. Coming back to the visual and verbal, both as a teacher and as a parent, I mean, you and I spend so much of our lives trying to persuade high school teachers and college professors to teach more like kindergarten teachers. Every time I walk into a kindergarten classroom and the routine is laid out visually and there's no questions about what are we doing next. And like, it's just like this, it's this beautiful way to incorporate both. And so I want to make that known that I've always admired a lot of preschool and kindergarten teachers on how they do such a magical job visually and verbally. And it seems like many students know exactly where they need to be. And if they don't, it's available to them.
That's a lovely way to think about it. Certainly, it's very common in a primary school classroom. I spend a lot of time in primary schools, and the daily schedule is up on the board. And when does this happen? And when does this happen? And when does this happen? In high schools, it's much more common for students to have individual schedules. So they're not in the same room all day because they're going from room to room to room. The scheduling demands are very different, but that certainly does create a working memory demand on that 15-year-old because they need to keep track of, I'm currently in this building, I need this set of books. I'm going to that building, I need that set of books. Oh, but wait a minute, today is a special schedule. So I'm going to the third building with a third set of books. So that's definitely working memory demand right there.
Well, and even beyond the schedule, when I walk into high school classrooms or college classrooms that really seem to have it figured out, it's not just the schedule, it's they don't just say the assignment out loud. It's written on the board. They have a bunch of visual cues to support what they're saying verbally for a lot of our students. And that seems to be really, really helpful.
And to be clear, it's also possible for there to be too much of that. So if we switch our conversation from the world of working memory to the world of attention, one of the problems in the world of attention is we actually, in the same way we have a relatively small amount of working memory, we're able to attend only to a relatively small number of things in any one moment. So I noticed, for instance, the background that you have right now is actually quite simple. There isn't a lot going on behind you. And that's actually very beneficial to me as a participant in the podcast. I'm not distracted by the stuff behind you. I can just look at you and talk with you, and that's helpful. So it's helpful to have some visual information, but it's also possible for things to get over-decorated very quickly. And a lot of the conversation I have in schools is about the way that visual materials that we intend to be decorative, in fact, distract students. And we have a surprisingly large and robust research pool showing how harmful that can be for learning. Students learn less in an over-decorated classroom.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that. I want you to call me out on something that I said in a presentation the other day, and I want you to tell me if I said something false. When we're talking about working memory overload, I said that taking a break and getting some movement will help reset that working memory so we're ready to go again. Is that true?
Yes. And here's why. Working memory has a very short time span. So the number that gets thrown around is 30 seconds. And I don't know how precisely that's been measured. But if we're having a conversation and we switch gears, 30 seconds later, that thing that we had been talking about in the past will be gone. So for instance, if way back at the beginning, when I asked you to put those 5 days of the week in alphabetical order, if we had paused and you had successfully done that and you'd said, oh, Friday, Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you had come up with that.
It's very impressive, yes.
That's in my long-term memory. It would be in your working memory. So by this point in the conversation, if I asked you to do that again, you would have to go back and recreate that working memory effort because your working memory has long since moved on to something else. I'll give you a somewhat funny example of this that almost everyone has had. If you've ever been in the toothpaste aisle of a CVS or a Walgreens, you have probably experienced working memory overload. There are so many choices. Do you want the charcoal or the minty or the whitening or the 2-pack or the fresh breath or the too many choices. So if you, like most people, try and buy toothpaste and then run out of the toothpaste aisle weeping because your working memory was overloaded, you're fine when you go to the paper towel aisle and pick up paper towels. Your working memory clears right away. Simply taking a break is a lovely way to reset working memory overload. With this exception, let's say, Brendan, you're my student and you're experiencing working memory overload because I've overloaded you. That I said, okay, Brendan, give me a sentence that has a subject, a verb, a direct object, an indirect object, and 3 prepositional phrases. It should begin with a frontal adverb. And you can't do that because it's an enormous working memory task. And I say, oh, come on, Brendan, we've been practicing this all day and you still can't do it. And I say, look, I'm really disappointed in you. So at this point, your working memory is overloaded because I overloaded it. So if you take a break, you'll come back and your working memory is fine, but you and I still have a problem. You're still going to be mad at me, and you should be. That was bad teaching right there. So what I tell teachers in that moment is you don't need to work. You don't need to do anything to fix their working memory. Their working memory will be fine. You need to do something. I need to do something to repair the relationship. I need to say, gosh, Brendan, I looked back at that thing I asked you to do, and that was just way too much. So let's start with a simple sentence. Let's just do subject, verb, object, and then you and I will build up a sentence together. And I'll take some time to be sure to reconnect with you positively so that your experience of class is one as a place that's cognitively manageable and emotionally safe, rather one that felt a little hostile a while ago. So movement is a great way to solve working memory problems as long as I, as the teacher, am taking care of the emotional response to working memory overload as well as the cognitive response.
That's a great reminder just to keep drawing upon that relationship, no matter, because sometimes it can feel complicated, right? But just coming back and drawing upon that relationship as the foundation, I think is a great reminder.
If I can jump in quickly, that you started off by asking about parents who get information that their child has low working memory. Part of what that means is that probably for that child, school is going to be an unusually difficult and frustrating place. And for that reason, having good working relationships with teachers and the support staff will be extra important. It's important for all students, of course, but to be able to struggle comfortably in class, the child needs to have a good relationship with the teacher and, if at all possible, with peers as well. And so that's one way to think about not just what are the cognitive supports for the child, but what are the emotional supports for the child? Can school be a safe place, even if it's not always super fulfilling because it's so hard so persistently?
Yeah, it's such a good reminder. My final question for you is systems. Just coming at it from an executive function perspective, I really feel for that student. Let's say this is a student who's in college who's struggled with working memory. I can think right away about certain organizational systems that student needs to have in order to be successful, to get as much out of his brain and into a system as possible. What comes to mind for you when you hear working memory deficits and systems that students, we should start coaching students on?
I think that same 3-question system that I proposed at the beginning, anticipate, identify, solve, I think for each individual person to have that in place for themselves as they grow up and negotiate school systems will be really important. So I, for instance, have learned, because I do what I do, I travel a lot, which means I spend a lot of time in rental cars. And of course, when I get into a rental car, there are a lot of pieces of that car that I need to use, but they're in a somewhat different place than they are in all the other cars. So I've learned when I get in the car, I don't turn the car on and drive out. I stop and I find out, okay, how exactly do I turn on the cruise control? How exactly do I control the air conditioning? How exactly do I plug in my phone? How exactly do I turn on the rear windshield wiper? How do I get all of the pieces up and running? And then I preview the map of how to get from where I am in this rental car parking garage to the hotel, because usually the rental car parking garage, drops you off in a very busy, chaotic traffic pattern. So I've learned to predict that's a very working memory intensive part of my life. And I just need to slow down and preview and get ready for that and break it up into as many small steps as possible. When you check into a hotel, perhaps you had this experience, they hand you the key and then they give you 15 different pieces of information about the hours for the dining hall and where the gym is and what the hours are for the pool and what the parking systems are and how to turn on the air conditioning. It's just a deluge of information. And what I've learned to do, because I can predict that, my strategy is I come with 3 questions. I know what I need to, what time does breakfast open? Where is the gym? And how do I get into the parking garage? That's all I need to know. So I just let the rest fly past me and I just focus on those 3 questions. And I've also learned to identify working memory overload in myself. So for instance, I spend most of my professional life standing in front of large groups of people talking about, say, working memory or attention. And often in the second half of the show, I'm getting tired, so my working memory starts getting tangled. And for me, the sign for that is when I start speaking in sentences that aren't coherent, when I start jumbling up my words. And I've learned that's not just me jumbling up my words, that's me experiencing working memory overload. There are too many things going on in my head. So I stop and I make a joke about it and I take a deep breath and I just reset and then I keep going with what I'm doing. So I've learned to be able to anticipate and identify those working memory overload experiences that I have. And I know what to do about them because they happen a lot, because working memory is always being pushed to the limit.
Yeah, it's you're speaking to the metacognition piece of executive function, right? Where it's like it's just the people that understand themselves, and this is hard for a lot of us, is to slow down and ask ourselves questions and try to identify what's going on. But the people that understand themselves are the ones who will be just fine, right? And so working on that, even through a working memory lens, is sounds like it's the way to go.
Yeah, certainly. From a teaching perspective, my teaching has been transformed from the switch from how I taught before I knew about working memory and after I taught about working memory. I'm still there. I'm still the same person, but the way I think about teaching has changed radically, and I hope for the better.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has. I'm sure your students are grateful that you take a second to slow down and notice when they're max, right? Because we talked about metacognition for us. A lot of times when you look out in the classroom, you see those blank faces. It's hard because we have our curriculum to get through. We have all these standards and this, knowing that nothing's going in anyways, we might as well take a second.
Absolutely. I'm so with you.
Before we sign off, is there anything else you think could be helpful for people to hear about working memory?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I can imagine someone listening to this podcast coming away having an extra weight in mind. And I just want to say, yes, it's certainly true that working memory problems are real problems. And once we are aware of them and start thinking about them and approaching them in the right way from the right perspectives, they're absolutely manageable problems. And both teachers and students and families and parents, the more that we know about this, the easier it is to be successful and in school and in life, because we understand the mind that we're bringing to the project, and that will make all the difference for success and happiness.
Thank you for saying that, because coming back to a comment from the beginning is it doesn't have to be an academic death sentence, right? It's learning about how we can build a life and build a classroom around these challenges and work through them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where can people find more of your work?
The name of my company is Translate the Brain. So you can either go to the website .translatethebrain.com, or the email address is andrew@translatethebrain. I also write the blog for a conference organization called Learning and the Brain. So if you go to learningthebrain.com, I have a blog post there every week, and I speak at those conferences pretty regularly. So if while you're there reading the blog and you see where the next conference is, you can find me at any of those conferences.
Thank you for mentioning the blog. I've read many, and I come away learning a lot every time. So
well, thank you. I enjoyed writing it.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and thank you for the work that you do.
Well, I appreciate your being so welcoming. It's been a really fun conversation.
Thank you for joining us on the Executive Function for All podcast. If today's episode brought you any value, please rate us 5 stars and share it with someone who may benefit. And remember, every small step you take builds towards your success. For resources and guidance, visit untappedlearning.com. Keep growing, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.